Before James Spader's longtime partner, Leslie Stefanson, there was another woman who occupied the most formative years of his life. She was there before recognition, before financial security, and before his career found its footing. She stood beside him through uncertainty, pressure, and years when success was far from guaranteed. Publicly, Spader's career endured demands most people never face. However, privately, control was harder to maintain. The strain built quietly, and when that marriage ended, it closed a chapter that had shaped him more deeply than many realized. The rise of James Spader. For decades, James Spader has kept his personal life sealed tight. No oversharing, no public confessions, no explanations. He built a career on revealing everything through his characters while revealing almost nothing about himself. Interviews stayed focused on work, cameras stayed out, and questions about love were quietly avoided. But behind that carefully guarded privacy, his personal life followed a far more uneven path. Stability proved harder to hold than success. And through all of it stood one woman whom he never publicly dissected, never dismissed, and never truly left behind. James Spader grew up in a quiet academic world that looked nothing like Hollywood. He was born James Todd Spader on February 7, 1960, in Boston, Massachusetts. Both of his parents were teachers, and education was the center of the household. Structure mattered, discipline mattered, expectations were clear. There was no early push toward acting, no family connection to the entertainment industry, and no obvious sign that he would end up as one of the most unconventional performers of his generation. Spader attended Phillips Academy in Andover, one of the most prestigious preparatory schools in the country. It was a place built to send students toward stable, traditional futures. But that path didn't hold him for long. He dropped out in the 11th grade, not because of scandal or failure, but because he simply didn't fit into the system. The environment felt restrictive. He wasn't interested in following a pre-written plan, and he left before even graduating. What followed was not a fast track into acting. It was work. Real, physical, ordinary jobs. He bussed tables. He shoveled manure on farms. He taught yoga classes to get by. These weren't stepping stones designed for show business. They were survival jobs, and they grounded him long before audiences ever knew his name. By the time he began acting seriously, he already understood routine, exhaustion, and the reality of working without recognition. His first major film role arrived quietly. In 1981, he appeared as Brooke Shields' brother in Endless Love. It wasn't a breakout performance, and it didn't instantly change his career. But it put him inside the industry. He learned how sets worked. He learned how small roles functioned. And more importantly, he learned patience. Throughout the 1980s, Spader continued taking roles that leaned away from convention. He wasn't cast as the clean-cut hero. He played characters that were unsettling, arrogant, emotionally distant, or difficult to like. Casting directors noticed something unusual. He was comfortable sitting in discomfort. He didn't soften characters to make them palatable. That reputation exploded in 1989 with a film titled Sex, Lies, and Videotape. The film wasn't loud. It didn't rely on spectacle. It was intimate, tense, and driven almost entirely by conversation and psychological pressure. Spader's performance stood out immediately. He wasn't expressive in a traditional way. He didn't explain himself. He let silence do the work. Critics took notice, and so did the international film community. The film won the Palme d'Or at Cannes, and Spader's name became closely tied to the rise of serious American independent cinema. From that point forward, his career stopped following predictable patterns. In the early 1990s, he moved between smaller, character-driven films and larger studio projects without trying to reshape his image. In 1994, he co-starred in Stargate, a major science fiction production that introduced him to a much broader audience. The film reached viewers who had never seen his earlier work, proving he could exist inside mainstream cinema without losing his edge. What became clear over time was that Spader wasn't choosing roles based on popularity. He gravitated toward characters who were morally unclear, emotionally guarded, or intellectually dominant. These weren't villains in the traditional sense. They were people who made others uneasy simply by speaking. That trait followed him naturally into television. His most defining work on the small screen came with The Practice and later Boston Legal. As Alan Shore, Spader delivered long courtroom monologues that felt controlled, sharp, and unpredictable. The industry rewarded that consistency. He won 3 Primetime Emmy Awards and earned multiple nominations from the Golden Globes and the Screen Actors Guild. These weren't fluke wins. They were proof of his sustained recognition across years, networks, and formats. By this point, his career had already spanned decades. He moved comfortably between film, television, and later voice acting, remaining active from 1978 to the present. Longevity like that comes from precision and refusal to dilute one's strengths. And yet, for all the acclaim and stability, his public image never told the full story. The more recognizable James Spader became, the more private he remained. Fame followed him, but it never seemed to define him. Fame gave James Spader control. Privacy gave him distance, but neither protected him from the one part of life he couldn't manage as carefully as a performance. As his career climbed and his public image hardened, something personal began slipping out of reach, and the deeper he disappeared behind silence, the more one unresolved love quietly followed him, waiting where no spotlight could erase it. The shadows behind the fame. Long before James Spader became synonymous with precision and control, Hollywood tried to define him in much smaller terms. In the mid-1980s, early roles in Pretty in Pink and Mannequin placed him into a narrow box almost immediately. He played the wealthy, sharp-edged antagonist, the polished young man audiences loved to dislike. The performances were effective, but they came with a cost. Casting decisions began to follow a pattern, and that pattern was hard to escape. By the time his breakout film, Sex, Lies, and Videotape arrived, Spader had already grown restless. The film changed how critics saw him, but it didn't entirely change how the industry treated him. His performance was unsettling, intimate, and controlled in a way that defied the teen movie mold. Still, Hollywood didn't suddenly see him as a traditional leading man. Instead, it leaned into something narrower, eccentric, morally ambiguous, and intellectually intimidating. That reputation followed him everywhere. Spader gravitated toward independent films and unconventional material, projects that offered depth rather than reach. These roles built his credibility, but limited his exposure. While his peers chased blockbusters, he chose scripts that didn't guarantee mass appeal. The trade-off was clear. He gained respect, but he gave up scale. At times, critics misunderstood that choice. Some labeled his career lazy, pointing to long gaps between projects and a refusal to stay constantly visible. But the reality was more deliberate. Spader avoided momentum for momentum's sake. He worked when the material interested him and stepped away when it didn't. That rhythm clashed with an industry that rewards constant output and self-promotion. His distance extended far beyond his work choices. Spader drew a firm line around his personal life and never softened it. He stated plainly that his personal life was not for public consumption. His relationships stayed private, his family stayed private, and he refused to turn intimacy into content. That refusal came with consequences. While other actors built brands through talk shows, headlines, and personal revelations, Spader remained inaccessible. He didn't create narratives for public consumption, and he didn't correct speculation. Over time, this made him less visible than his peers, not less respected, but less familiar. His reasoning was practical. Spader expressed concern that exposure could harm his family, especially his children. He actively shielded them from attention, avoiding red carpets and media cycles that might pull them into a spotlight they didn't choose. This stance shaped his schedule, his public appearances, and the offers he accepted. In Hollywood, privacy often gets misread as aloofness. Spader's guarded nature reinforced a growing mystique around him. He became known as someone who didn't play along. Admirers saw integrity, critics saw distance, and the fans saw a celebrity they couldn't fully reach. That same intensity carried onto his set. Over the years, Spader earned a reputation as a difficult actor. But this label didn't come from chaos or unreliability. It came from his intense preparation for every film. He arrived knowing every line, every pause, every intention. He questioned scenes. He pushed for clarity. That level of focus sometimes slowed production, and not everyone appreciated it. Yet the same colleagues who described him as challenging also described him as deeply professional. He didn't waste time. He didn't improvise carelessly. His performances were built, not stumbled into. That seriousness is what later led him into an unexpected corner of mainstream pop culture. In 2015, Spader voiced Ultron in Avengers: Age of Ultron. The casting raised eyebrows. Spader himself was hesitant at first, unsure if voice acting in a massive franchise aligned with his instincts.
Ultron was on a screen, a monitor in front of me.
I've outgrown you, Tony. I've evolved.
Marvel Studios president Kevin Feige ultimately convinced him by focusing on what mattered: his voice, his cadence, and his ability to convey menace without exaggeration. The result stood apart. Ultron didn't sound like a typical villain. He sounded calculating, calm, and quietly threatening.
The inevitability. You rise, only to fall.
Many praised the performance as one of the film's strongest elements. Others felt the character was underused, believing Spader's range wasn't fully explored. When later MCU projects recast Ultron with different performers, fans noticed. The decision sparked disappointment among those who considered Spader's portrayal definitive. Even within a massive franchise built on spectacle, his presence left a specific imprint. But beneath all of these challenges Spader has had to deal with, something else was at work. Not a public struggle, not a scandal, but a private battle that shaped his routines, his control, and his need for order. While he rarely discussed this problem, it quietly influenced everything that happened in his life. James Spader's battle with OCD. For someone who has spent a lifetime controlling what the public sees, James Spader has been unusually direct about one internal struggle. In a 2014 interview with Rolling Stone, James Spader acknowledged that he lives with obsessive-compulsive disorder. He described it as something far more ordinary and far more persistent. He called it a constant companion. Spader made it clear that this disorder wasn't something he had learned to outgrow or conquer. It was simply there, woven into how he moves through the world. He has also spoken plainly about the difficulty of it. At one point, he said, "It's very hard for me, you know? It makes you very addicted in behavior because routine and ritual become entrenched." Spader explained that the accumulation of it, the way obsessive thoughts and compulsive behaviors shape daily life, poses a great challenge to him. He has never offered a precise timeline for when he was formally diagnosed, but he has implied that the condition has followed him since early adulthood, long before his career stabilized. What Spader has described is not the neat, cinematic version of obsessive-compulsive disorder. He has talked about his fixation on details, strict routines, and an overwhelming need for structure. Tasks that appear simple to others can become exhausting when filtered through compulsive habits. Decisions take longer. Transitions are harder. Order becomes non-negotiable. This constant mental pressure doesn't switch off when cameras roll. Spader has said that the disorder influences both his personal and professional life, not selectively, but entirely. It affects how he prepares for films, how he memorizes lines, and how he shows up on sets. The condition doesn't disappear for performances or deadlines. It moves with him. In his career, that fixation has had visible consequences. Spader is known for meticulous preparation. He studies scripts obsessively, breaks down dialogue with precision, and commits fully to routines that help him feel anchored. To collaborators unfamiliar with that level of intensity, it can seem excessive or strange. To Spader, it's survival. That same focus has strengthened his performances. Characters like Raymond "Red" Reddington in The Blacklist depend on control, calculation, and verbal exactness. The cadence, pauses, and verbal dominance that define those roles don't happen accidentally. They are built through repetition and rigid attention to detail, traits Spader has openly linked to his obsessive-compulsive disorder. But the benefits come with friction. On Boston Legal, his compulsive tendencies sometimes complicated production. Co-star William Shatner has spoken about moments when Spader's rigidity created minimal tension during filming. Spader needed things done a certain way, and deviation could throw him off balance. Shatner once said, "Our craft service table was located near the stage entrance, so he had to avoid walking by and watching people licking their fingers or spreading butter on a bagel." Those moments fed into an existing Hollywood narrative. The label of being a difficult actor followed him, in part because of these behaviors. Obsessive preparation can slow a set. Rigid routines can clash with collaborative spontaneity. In an industry built on compromise, someone who needs control can be hard to accommodate. Spader has never denied that reality. He hasn't softened the edges of the story or asked for sympathy. Instead, he has spoken about this disorder as both a burden and a tool. It makes daily life harder. It complicates relationships. It adds strain where others might move freely. But it also sharpens his work. It gives him access to characters that thrive on tension, precision, and intellectual dominance. Importantly, he has never framed the disorder as something that defines his identity or excuses his behavior. He talks about it as a condition he lives with, not a narrative he performs. There's no motivational arc, no claim of mastery, just management. That management, however, comes at a cost. The need for control doesn't end when work stops. It spills into personal life, shaping habits, routines, and emotional availability. Living with something that never fully recedes leaves little room for chaos or unpredictability, especially in relationships. And that's where the story begins to narrow. Because while James Spader could manage scripts, schedules, and characters with obsessive precision, there was one part of his life that never fit neatly into any system. One relationship that resisted control, routine, and distance, and one woman who stayed with him long after everything else had been carefully contained. The love of his life. James Spader rarely speaks in absolutes about his personal life. He avoids labels, avoids explanations, and avoids rewriting the past for public comfort. But among the few constants in his early adult life, one name stands apart: Victoria Elizabeth Keel. Victoria Keel was born on June 1, 1959, in Rochester, New York. Her mother, Lee Keel, raised her largely outside the orbit of fame. Unlike many partners of rising actors, Victoria was never interested in visibility. She pursued creative work quietly and built her identity behind the scenes. Public information about her education is limited, but her early career points clearly toward the arts. By the time James Spader met her in the early 1980s, both were still finding their footing. Spader was not yet a recognizable name. He was working in New York, taking small roles, supporting himself with ordinary jobs, and navigating uncertainty. Victoria, meanwhile, was building experience as a set designer and decorator, contributing to productions without attaching herself to the spotlight. Their connection formed away from Hollywood pressure. It wasn't shaped by premieres or publicity schedules. It was rooted in shared creative instincts and mutual understanding of unstable work. They both knew what it meant to labor without guarantees, and they both understood how invisible effort could be. Victoria went on to work in film production, contributing to projects such as Jack's Back, and later Sex, Lies, and Videotape. Her work stayed largely unpublicized, consistent with her preference to remain behind the camera. Those who knew her described her as focused, capable, and uninterested in attention. She wasn't building a public profile. She was building a private life. Spader and Keel dated for several years before marrying in 1987. The relationship unfolded slowly, deliberately, and without spectacle. They avoided Hollywood publicity from the start. There were no carefully staged interviews, no public declarations, and no curated image of domestic bliss. Their marriage existed largely outside public view. During that time, Spader's career was beginning to shift dramatically. His earlier roles had typecast him, but his breakout film changed the trajectory of his professional life. As his reputation grew, Victoria remained a stabilizing presence. She was there as he transitioned away from teen films and into more demanding, unconventional work. During a period when his career required risk and patience, their home life remained grounded. In 1989, the couple welcomed their first son, Sebastian Spader. 3 years later, in 1992, their second son, Elijah Spader, was born. Fatherhood deepened Spader's insistence on privacy. He has described himself as a devoted parent, but he never used his children as part of his public narrative. He shielded them from cameras, from interviews, and from the culture surrounding celebrity families. That protection shaped how the family lived. Spader limited public appearances. Victoria avoided attention entirely. Their children grew up largely outside Hollywood's glare, a choice both parents seemed aligned on. But as Spader's career accelerated, the balance began to strain. His work ethic intensified. He took on roles that demanded obsessive preparation and long hours. His routines became more rigid. Reports from that period suggest that the eccentric habits he later openly associated with OCD grew more pronounced. Structure became essential to him. Flexibility became harder. Hollywood also pulled in ways that were difficult to resist. Increased recognition came with expectations, such as travel, promotion, and extended production schedules. Even for someone committed to privacy, the industry applies pressure. Maintaining distance from it requires constant effort, and that effort can take a toll. Victoria's life moved in a different direction. Over time, she transitioned out of Hollywood and into interior design and decoration, working outside the film industry. The shift reflected a desire for a quieter, more controlled environment, something increasingly difficult to maintain within Spader's orbit. Neither Spader nor Keel ever spoke publicly about the breakdown of their marriage. There were no interviews, no explanations, and no attempts to manage the story. In 2004, after over 17 years together, they divorced. The reason given publicly was irreconcilable differences, a phrase that revealed nothing by design. After the divorce, Spader remained committed to co-parenting his sons, continuing the same pattern of protection and discretion that had defined their upbringing. Thankfully, the divorce did not derail his career. Professionally, he continued moving forward, but personally, it reinforced a pattern that had already been forming. After the marriage ended, Spader became even more guarded. His public presence narrowed further, and his private life grew more sealed. This first marriage had shaped him in ways that were not visible on screen. It grounded his early adulthood. It gave him stability during years of uncertainty. It anchored him before fame hardened his boundaries. And even after it ended, its influence lingered, not as a public story, but as a private one. Victoria Keel never became a celebrity spouse. She never capitalized on proximity to fame. She remained what she had always been, a private person who played a critical role during the most formative years of James Spader's life. And when that chapter closed, it left behind a man who had learned how deeply love could shape him and how difficult it was to rebuild once it was gone. The connection after divorce. After the end of his first marriage, James Spader did not reinvent himself publicly, but privately, the divorce marked a turning point. It left him, by all indications, searching for something quieter and more stabilizing than what his earlier life had allowed. Spader wanted companionship that did not compete with his need for distance and control. That search did not happen through social circles or Hollywood events. It happened the same way many pivotal moments in Spader's life have happened, through work. In 2002, Spader was filming The Stick-Up, a modestly scaled crime movie far removed from blockbuster spectacle. One of his co-stars was Leslie Stefanson, who played a central role opposite him. The set was professional, contained and focused, an environment where Spader was most at ease. Their on-screen chemistry was immediate, but not theatrical. It came across as controlled, grounded, and understated. What began as collaboration soon moved off camera. The connection developed naturally, without publicity or announcement. This relationship began shortly after Spader's separation from his first wife. Yet, it did not present itself as a rebound or spectacle. It felt like a continuation, quietly marking a new chapter rather than closing an old one. From the start, the relationship was kept out of public view. There were no magazine exclusives, no red carpet confirmations, and no attempts to define it for outside consumption. That discretion was not accidental. It aligned with how both of them lived. Leslie Stefanson was born on May 10, 1971, in Fargo, North Dakota. Her background differed sharply from the entertainment world she would later enter. She pursued higher education seriously, graduating from Barnard College at Columbia University with a degree in English literature. That academic foundation shaped how she approached both acting and, later, article. She began her career as a model before transitioning into acting in the 1990s. Unlike performers chasing constant exposure, Stefanson's acting resume was selective. She appeared in notable films such as The General's Daughter, Unbreakable, and The Hunted. Her performances were controlled and physical, often emphasizing presence over emotional display. But acting was never her final destination. In 2003, shortly after beginning her relationship with Spader, Stefanson stepped away from acting entirely. She shifted her focus to sculpture, committing to it full-time. This was not framed as a pause or a detour. It was a clear decision to leave one creative field and devote herself fully to another. Over time, her work gained serious recognition. In 2019, her sculpture La Bestia won the National Sculpture Society's top prize, an achievement that placed her firmly within the contemporary art world. By then, she was no longer known primarily as an actress who left Hollywood, but as an established sculptor in her own right. Her identity became layered but coherent: former model, former actress, and award-winning artist. Importantly, her success did not depend on Spader's fame. Her work stood independently, often far removed from entertainment media. Spader and Stefanson have been together since 2002, making their relationship one of the longest and most stable of his life. They were reportedly engaged in 2008, though, consistent with their pattern, they never turned the engagement into a public event or ongoing narrative. That same year, on August 31, 2008, they welcomed their son, Nathaniel. Fatherhood once again reshaped Spader's priorities. He had already demonstrated fierce protectiveness over his older sons, and that approach did not change. Nathaniel was kept entirely out of the spotlight. There were no posed family photos, no public anecdotes, and no attempts to fold personal life into career storytelling. The couple lives together in New York City, a choice that reflects both of their values. New York offered distance from Hollywood's constant attention, while still allowing Spader to maintain his career, and Stefanson to work uninterrupted in her studio. Their home life appears structured around balance, rather than visibility. Privacy remained central. Both avoided discussing their relationship publicly. When Spader did speak in interviews, it was about work. When Stefanson appeared in art contexts, it was about her art. The relationship existed fully, but quietly. The stability of this partnership coincided with the most successful period of Spader's television career. Shortly after their relationship began, he entered what would become a defining era, starting with Boston Legal and later The Blacklist. These roles required long-term commitment, intense preparation, and emotional consistency over many years. Having a partner whose life did not revolve around Hollywood may have been essential. Stefanson's retreat from acting meant she was not competing with his schedule or public identity. Instead, she focused on her art, providing a parallel creative life rather than a mirrored one. That dynamic reduced friction and allowed each of them to operate independently while remaining connected. Emotionally, their relationship appears to offer balance. After a divorce shaped by career pressure, privacy conflicts, and diverging lifestyles, Spader found a companion who shared his instinct for discretion. Stefanson did not push him into visibility. She did not redefine him publicly. She supported him without absorbing his career as her own. After becoming a father once again, Spader's identity was reinforced, not just as an actor, but as a parent managing multiple roles quietly and deliberately. His insistence on shielding his children never softened. If anything, it became more absolute. The partnership between James Spader and Leslie Stefanson does not fit a Hollywood template. It lacks spectacle. It avoids definition. It resists narration. But its longevity and consistency definitely reveals something important about who Spader became after his divorce. This relationship isn't about changing who he was or putting on a new image. It works because both of them wanted the same things: privacy, stability, and separate creative lives. They do not compete for attention, and they respect each other's boundaries. These values fit naturally with how Spader already lived. His first marriage helped steady him when he was young and still finding his place. This later relationship helped him maintain balance as his career became more demanding and allowed him to move forward without repeating the same personal strain. What do you think? Is Victoria Keel the love of his life, or Leslie Stefanson? Drop your thoughts in the comments section below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click on the next video on your screen, like this video, and subscribe to our channel for more updates.